With early medieval philosophy covered, it's time to move on to a later medieval period called the Scholastic period. The Scholastic period in medieval philosophy was characterized by two main things: the rise of universities and the resurgence of Aristotle's influence. The French philosopher Peter Abelard was the first major author in this new context, bringing forth ancient philosophy again, even though he had access to no more sources than his predecessors. Following Anselm, he even more vehemently defended reason above any authority, being criticized and censored by the more religious, especially due to his reputation for arrogance and never having lost an argument. He was much more an Aristotelian than a Platonist, being the first to work on Boethius's translations and commentaries of Aristotle's works, and becoming possibly the most important logician and philosopher of language in the medieval period. He denounced Platonic universal concepts, in that they are mere names akin to adjectives and not susceptible to truth or falsity, making him a nominalist, as we will elaborate on in the next tutorial. He also focused on intention in his ethics, introducing what would become known as moral luck. For example, a rich person who can donate to the poor couldn't be considered morally better than a poor person who needs donations, as the latter simply cannot part with the little they have. Actions themselves cannot be good or bad, as they are subject to this kind of luck involved in one's context, and thus only one's intentions can determine the character of their morality. In this way, a life bound to happiness through virtue, even though perhaps imperfect, can lead to the good afterlife. In the field of philosophy of action, one of the main contributions from medieval philosophy was the introduction of intention, given that the paradigm of ancient philosophy would judge one person's actions mainly on their merits as being virtuous or vicious, or someone's character as a whole, neglecting somewhat their motives or intentions. Soon after Abelard, the more complete writings of Aristotle rose once more in the West, through the avid studies of Middle Eastern philosophers, especially Ibn Sina, Latinized to Avicenna, and Ibn Rushd, Latinized to Averroes. Avicenna was still a Neoplatonist and aligned his philosophical thinking with his religious beliefs in Islam, but he was also an important physician and astronomer. Called the preeminent master by the Islamic world, many consider him one of the most influential thinkers in human history, second only to Aristotle himself, as he was directly responsible for the resurgence in Greek studies, which prompted the European Renaissance. He focused on empirical analysis of the world, conciliating Islamic dialectic theology with Aristotelian naturalism. He criticized naturalism for its search of eternal characteristics to define universals, since these new Islamic ideas defended their immediacy. This means that, according to Avicenna, nature can only be analyzed by what is immediately given, present empirically in the world in that moment, regardless of any further inference we can make, another very early formulation of what would become logical positivism in the 20th century. Thus, he synthesized his own perspective in that every finite being and existence is contingent, but necessary, respecting Aristotle's metaphysics in that everything is connected to a primary cause, a divine being who would then be the necessary condition to all others. Following him, Averroes, also a philosopher and physician, as well as a judge, focused significantly more on Aristotle, the ultimate human mind to him, and an empirical method of philosophical inquiry. He believed philosophy can be not only demonstrable, but also central to religious issues, not alternative to them. He criticized Avicenna in that contingency, or non-necessity, of beings would not be characteristic of a higher divine power. He also defends that matter is variable, but the mind is eternal, and all minds are one, achieving completeness and holiness when together in contact, forming the active intellect. In spite of his thorough philosophical emphasis, he was rather dogmatic regarding reincarnation, miracles, and other religious themes. Besides being the beacon for renewed interest in Aristotelian studies in Christian Europe, he was also very influential to Jewish philosophy. The first Europeans influenced by him in the 1270s, however, were condemned for heresy, so it took a while for him to be widely accepted as a commentator of Aristotle and a philosopher on his own. Universities similar to what we know today also emerged during medieval times. During the 12th century, Europe experienced massive growth in city size and population density, with steady progress towards urbanization. For this reason, the Church needed a better way to instruct its clergy in the canon of Catholicism than monasteries isolated from urban life. With a decree from Pope Gregory VII, the so-called cathedral schools would become the first European universities. The curriculum comprised all the liberal arts of the time. A student would start with the trivium, whose subjects would be rhetoric, grammar, and logic, which was required to advance to quadrivium, whose subjects would be arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. As expected, philosophy made its presence in the curriculum. Aristotle's works were used to teach logic, Cicero's works to teach rhetoric, and many other ancient authors were taught alongside them. Various courses were offered in which the students could read forbidden works, like Aristotle's Metaphysics, Ethics, and treatises on natural sciences. Usually, the studies took 6 years to complete, and the student would receive a Master of Arts degree. The resurgence of Aristotelianism through the Islamic philosophers, together with the appearance and boom of universities, marked a new renaissance in medieval philosophy with the height of the Scholastic period. Though many thinkers rose in this period, Thomas Aquinas, John Duns Scotus, and William of Ockham are widely recognized as the most relevant. The Italian Thomas Aquinas was chronologically the first in this context, another Christian saint, and he both criticized Averroë's reading of Aristotle and became an avid commentator himself, though never abandoning the predominant Neoplatonic perspective. Although having high praise of Aristotle, calling him the philosopher, as many would by his time, he considered philosophy a pagan practice, and thus never labeled himself a philosopher. He was a strong proponent of naturalism, a perspective in which nature and its laws are not mysterious and given miraculously by divine providence, but they obey logical relationships and are wholly discoverable through rational investigation. Though divine truth may occasionally be provided by the Christian God, it is through rational knowledge that we come to understand the world. This is in tandem with his ethics, as he believed there were natural laws, which are identifiable through rational intuition and examination. Like Aristotle, he identified virtues which could be exercised toward a good life, but differentiated between rational and theological ones, which would be discoverable through faith and would be the ultimate criteria for good actions. Thus, the natural and the spiritual would be two aspects of the same divine construction, with the soul, for example, being the Aristotelian form of the body. John Duns Scotus, another Scottish John, known as the subtle doctor, would veer against the nominalists in favor of the universals, defending their realism as, for example, shared natures, much like the humanity in different humans, or redness of different red things. Existence itself would be several instances of one great primal mass, and their instantiations would be a direct link to the essence they represent, a position many such as Aquinas denied. He also defended the existence of a spiritual substance, and that the body and soul would be examples of one substance having two different forms. This was in line with Avicenna, which he adapted to allow for the infiniteness of the Christian God, which permitted the scientific knowledge of their work through rational identification of its objective reality and potential universalizability. Nature and human will would then be his interpretation of Aristotle's active potencies, being able to interact with one another in order to create an intellectual appetite. Thus, only the rational will would be truly free and autonomous, contrary to a will guided only by irrational desire. He would feud frequently with the English William of Ockham, nicknamed the more than subtle doctor, who would develop nominalism into what is known today as conceptualism. This went against universals, proposing that the names of things are not merely names, but limited concepts constantly existing and adapting to new information in our minds. Though another strong theologian Catholic, he was a great defender of naturalism, even criticizing Aquinas' positions as too abstract and calling universalism the worst error of philosophy. A principle that would come to be known as Occam's razor is frequently misattributed to him, but it certainly meant a strong criticism of overcomplicated ontological constructs, calling for simplistic writings relying solely on what is self-evident, demonstrable, or present in Holy Scripture. A simple formulation of the principle would be, if two arguments reach the same conclusion, the simplest one is probably truer, as depending on fewer propositions being true meant a statistically greater chance for the explanation of a phenomenon to be true. This strongly naturalistic philosophical environment would set the stage for the development of the scientific and industrial revolutions, and therefore the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment, which were the cradle of modern philosophy. Clearly, this would not be possible without the creation of universities, a place where ideas could flourish in the dark to an extent. But before we get there, we must analyze the logical enterprises of medieval thinkers, so let's do that next.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.